Hi, I'm Stewart Spinks and welcome to episode 312 of my podcast, Beekeeping Short and Sweet. I recently visited the site I intend to use for our heather honey adventure. It's pretty bleak high on the moors, and first thing in the morning with the mists rolling through, you'd wonder how the bees were ever going to get out of the hive. Things changed quite dramatically, as I'll explain. It also looks like our local summer nectar flow is coming to an end. If you're taking a honey crop from your bees, remember to leave them enough so they don't starve. Beekeeping Short and Sweet, a beekeeping podcast for the inquisitive beekeeper with a short attention span. A beekeeper, in fact, just like me. This week's podcast is sponsored in part by Modern Beekeeping, suppliers of general beekeeping equipment including high-density polyhives. These include Paradise National hives, Swenty polyhives and of course Honeypore hives, my particular favourite. More than this, Modern Beekeeping also supply traditional cedar and pine hives, a range of very effective bee feeds called Appy Mix and Appy Pasta, and a full range of all the must-have beekeeping equipment for every beekeeper. For all your beekeeping needs, contact Paul at Modern Beekeeping by visiting their website www.modernbeekeeping.co.uk. Hi everyone. Another week goes by and time for my weekly beekeeping ramblings and updates. Well, I hope they're not too much of a ramble. Anyway, we're still working full on and it's a critical time for final preparations to get our colonies ready for the trip to the North Yorkshire moors to attempt another heather honey crop. More on that shortly. We should talk weather, however. It finally looks like we might get a few days of settled, fairly hot weather in the coming week, although last week wasn't too bad at all. Certainly our colonies have been at their busiest and there feels to be a certain amount of urgency setting in with our bees as the main summer nectar flow starts to dry up. Noticeably, some of our colonies are getting a little defensive. Previously calm, almost friendly bees are starting to get a little grumpy when the hive is opened, not wanting us to interfere with their honey production, or they believe that we're about to rob them of all their hard work. Now, we don't have a need to inspect every week through the summer, certainly not once that urge to swarm has been dealt with. Unfortunately, this year I seem to have suffered one of our worst swarming years ever, with so many colonies getting away early in the season. This has meant our spring honey crop had been very badly hit. Yet, every cloud with its silver lining, as they say, and we seem to have benefited by having colonies requeen themselves, build up strongly through late spring and into the summer. This has resulted in large colonies for our main honey production period, and colonies continue to look strong with 8 to 10 frames of brood in all stages in many of our colonies. We've added supers where needed, and it does appear we're going to get quite a nice honey crop from our home apiaries. These are the apiaries not necessarily at the bottom of my garden. I don't think I'd get away with it, as my garden is only a dozen paces long. I don't even keep one beehive at home, as my young grandsons would be too inquisitive, and that's always going to end in tears. When I speak of home apiaries, what I mean is those that are in fixed locations here in Norfolk where we keep our bees all year round. This being different to the colonies currently at the Borage farm where we consider ourselves more migratory beekeepers. Just going back to the overall strength of our colonies, it feels like some of them are only just coming into their full potential, and these colonies have mostly missed the summer nectar flow. Ironically, these hives are in a great position to go to the heather moors, yet, and somewhat reluctantly, I'm not going to take them all on that particular road trip this year. I made a promise not to overdo it physically this year. I want to make sure that I can manage what we do take. I'm always guilty of stretching the elastic band as far as it'll go, and sometimes beyond that breaking point. This year's 20 colonies will be fine. I was going to say I might stretch it to 24, but I am going to stick to my promise. So, 20 colonies, and I have so many strong hives to choose from this year, all from the home apiaries. We're leaving the borage colonies this year and just returning those back to base once that crop is finished. We have another project planned for those, something we'll maybe chat about in the coming weeks. For now, I have everything ready to manage the heather colonies in readiness for that journey. The plan is to remove the summer honey from those colonies next week. That's the final week of July, crazy though that sounds. Where did the summer go? Anyway, there's a little bit of work required to fully prepare these colonies, and that starts by making them as light as we possibly can by removing the honey crop before we move them. You may recall last year we took colonies from the borage, having removed the supers of honey early in preparation. The bees then decided they would refill the empty supers we put on them to clear the bees into. That meant we took partially filled supers from Essex all the way up to North Yorkshire. Not a particularly clever thing to do, but a definite learning experience, a mistake not to be repeated this year. So next week, the supers come off and we'll add 2 empty supers to those colonies going to the moors, one of which will be foundation for cut comb. The colonies will have around 4 days between these empty supers going on and the trip to the moors, and with an ever-dwindling local nectar supply, I don't think they'll have much of a chance to store anything in them. Not so on the borage. Once cut, the borage seems to regrow very quickly and put out fresh flowers which yield a significant amount of nectar. This is the little bonus at the end of the season that our bees hopefully can benefit from and fill the space that they have in their brood box as the brood nest areas start to reduce. So here I want to touch on a really important point, particularly for anyone new to beekeeping, but more generally, I guess, as a reminder to those of you who've been doing this for a few years now. Please do check the brood box for food stores before you put your clearer boards on. Make sure your colonies have enough food in there to sustain them through the period of August when you may be treating them prior to feeding. We've been checking a few colonies during filming sessions in the last couple of weeks, and it's been noticeable that several colonies have very large brood areas, so much in fact that they've filled every cell of a brood frame with brood and haven't put any food in those individual frames. Traditionally, we'd like to see an arch of food stores over the brood area in each frame, honey into the corners and an arch of pollen beneath it, immediately above the brood nest. That's not what we're seeing in a lot of colonies at the moment. I find that what they've done is put the food in the 1st and 10th frame within the brood box, but nowhere else. And in some cases, where we have 9 or even 10 frames of brood, it's all in the supers. Now, this will change as the brood nest shrinks down to their autumn and winter size, and that will allow for food to be stored closer to the brood nest in the brood box. But right now, if I were to take all of the supers off as a honey crop, I can see that several of my colonies would be put in real danger of starvation. There's a lot of mouths to feed, with little by the way of food stores coming in, so do just be mindful of what you're seeing before you take all of the honey away. Better to leave them a super and use that to overwinter them on, rather than go back in a fortnight and find that they've starved and died. So, last week I travelled up to the Heathermoors to tick another box that, unfortunately, we left unchecked last year, the reconnaissance visit, and I'm so glad that I did. The plan was to put the bees in 2 locations, one of which was the same as last year. This had me a little concerned for 2 reasons. Firstly, last year we had that horrible chronic bee paralysis virus problem. The chosen site was against a broken down south-facing wall. The prevailing wind blew from west to east and I think spread the disease along the line from the middle to the eastern end of our hives. The second concern was that last year the ground was very uneven and very, very boggy. Now I could see myself getting caught out by the ongoing wet conditions, and I really didn't want the embarrassment of reporting to you that I'd got stuck. So with that in mind, I determined that I would try to find a couple of better locations. On the morning of my agreed meeting with the gamekeeper, I discovered that the moors can be a remote and wild location. Thick cloud and mist had pretty much dropped down onto the moor, and it was cold and wet. At one point, I could hardly see my hand in front of my face, and I really didn't know how our bees were going to be able to get out of their hives in such conditions, let alone forage and store heather honey. I imagine it's a factor in the spread of CBPV. All those very strong colonies built up over the summer by us beekeepers, crammed into brood boxes and supers, only to find themselves restricted in flying time and really cramped up inside the hive, perfect for the spread of a virus through a colony. It does still concern me for this year, but I've worked hard to make sure we don't have any signs of CBPV in our colonies, so it will be a case of fingers crossed and an eye on the weather. That weather appears to change instantly. Having just described a most bleak scenario, within an hour or so it had changed to bright, warm sunshine, so much so that I thought I was going to get sunburnt. We can but hope that it stays fine for the limited period our bees are up there, only 3 or 4 weeks. Anyway, I met with the gamekeeper and discussed where we could put our colonies, and was relieved to be shown 2 new sites that we could use that, somewhat surprisingly, were on hard tracks with no boggy ground to travel over at all. These 2 sites, we decided, were perfect for our bees, as they both had cover protecting from the westerly winds. As soon as the sun rises, and of course weather permitting, they'll get the full heat from the late summer sun, warm up quickly, and be able to get out foraging fast. So that trip was well worth it, and should make life a lot more comfortable when I drive the bees up there and offload them in the dark of the night. No nasty, boggy potholes to negotiate, no difficult turns at the edge of a precipice to worry about, and actually some firm ground with pallets already set out, ready for my hives. I have that beekeeper's optimism filling me up right now, and I'm looking forward to the trip with anticipation and excitement. Changing the subject, has anyone seen any wasps or hornets yet? When I say hornets, it's the European hornet that I'm referring to, not the yellow-legged Asian hornet. It's that time of year once more, as we find the summer nectar yield tapers away and dries up, these opportunistic thieves will come calling. I saw a wasp in one of our apiaries just yesterday morning, and it reminded me that we need to start thinking about setting up our hives to be best able to defend themselves. This generally means making sure that colonies are nice and strong. Having lots of guard bees means wasps are not easily able to sneak into the hive. Now, something that I do through the summer nectar flow is remove entrance blocks to allow colonies to maximise the accessibility of the hive. No tiny little entrances where the workers returning with a full load of nectar and pollen get delayed because there's a massive queue of like-minded workers all trying to get back inside to drop off and head back out again. Well, now is the time to start putting those entrance blocks back in, or reducing the size of that entrance if you have a block already in place. In terms of how much of a reduction you give your bees, well, that really depends on the size and strength of the colony. I like to have a situation in the coming weeks where instead of giving the bees lots of space to get in and out of the hive, it turns into something of a bottleneck. The workers are forced to wait to get back in at that reduced entrance, and because of this, wasps find it almost impossible to access the hive without being fought off by guard bees or workers waiting to get back in. The result of this is that the wasps will turn their attention to a weaker colony somewhere else. They're looking for an easy meal after all. They don't want to have to fight for it and don't want to put themselves at risk of an overwhelming attack from multiple honeybees, so they go elsewhere. Our European hornets have never really given our bees anything more than an occasional challenge. They do take a few bees on the wing, but again, don't appear in large numbers to cause a huge problem. We have a European hornet's nest at the fishing lakes once more. Again, it's in one of the bird nesting boxes, but it's not causing any problems at the apiary. Hopefully, it will remain that way. I'm glad to say that I've not seen any signs of the yellow-legged Asian hornet as yet. Long may that continue, but I do think it's time to set out some traps. Remember, don't kill them, trap them and report them using the Asian Hornet Watch reporting app on your phone. Well, that's it for this week. Don't forget to check out my website, www.norfolk-honey.co.uk, and for my latest videos and podcasts with more updates, tips and techniques, it's the same Patreon page, www.patreon.com/Norfolk Honey. And remember, I'm Stewart Spinks, and that was Beekeeping Short and Sweet.